Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show, friends. The big question today is China's social credit system coming to America? Politico is reporting several Republican-leaning states that eschewed so-called vaccine passports over concerns that they limited freedom are now embracing the technology behind them so that their residents can travel and get their immunization and health records online. The technology, which allows proof of a COVID-19 vaccination to be digitized and often includes a QR code, had been touted by supporters largely in Democrat-leaning states as a way to facilitate safer reopening after pandemic-related shutdowns. But now the technology is gaining momentum in at least 5 states, Arizona, Mississippi, South Carolina, Oklahoma, and Utah, despite bans on vaccine passports or their governors opposing them. These states see the passports, which often include a scannable black and white square code, a QR code, as a way to facilitate travel to places that require proof of vaccination and give residents easier access to their records through a more nimble digital format, Politico reported. The Stop Vax Passports Task Force, which I am part of, proudly has warned for a year now about the dangers of digital vaccine passports. These passports are a grave danger to liberty in any free country because they're easily transformed into a Western version of the Chinese Communist Party's social credit system in just a matter of minutes, according to tech experts. Don't be fooled when these elected officials in these states tell you it's not really a vax passport. It is. It's just a digital health card, they'll tell you. But that's semantics. They know and they admit the term vaccine passport is radioactive, so they're calling it something else. Well, today, human rights activist and president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers and chair of the Stop Vax Passports Task Force that I'm a member of, Reggie Littlejohn, joins me this week. Reggie, welcome to the Rob Maness Show.
Thank you so much, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here.
We are proud to have you, and thank you so much. I know you are a very busy person, and for my audience to get the opportunity to hear about you and what you do, including the Stop Vax Passports Task Force, is a great opportunity for us. So we really appreciate it. Now, you're the president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers. I'll be honest, I'm a staunchly pro-life person and had not heard of your organization until I met you through the Committee on Present Danger China, and it's a very interesting organization. I really like the work you guys do. Tell the audience about your organization.
Well, I'm an attorney. I'm a graduate of Yale Law School, and in the 90s, I represented a couple of refugees in the cases for political asylum in the United States. These were women from China, and they were victims of the one-child policy. And it was in the 90s that I found out that basically that the Chinese Communist Party was lying to the world. They had put out that the one-child policy was basically voluntary. And my first client had been forcibly sterilized, meaning that she had been dragged out of her home, screaming and crying, and held down to, a table and sterilized without anesthesia. And it broke her health. I mean, she had permanent disabling health issues after that. And that's when I discovered that the one-child policy was enforced through forced abortion, forced sterilization, and even infanticide. And I eventually left the practice of law and through a long process ended up using all of the skills that I had gained as an attorney, as an advocate, as a litigator, to advocate on behalf of the women and the babies of China. So I have at this point testified, I think 9 times at the United States Congress. I have spoken at the European Parliament, the British Parliament, Irish Parliament, Canadian Parliament, many times with officials of the Vatican, the United Nations. I've been twice to the White House. And so what we're doing is we are saying that forced abortion in China and the sex-selective abortion of baby girls must stop. And forced abortion is continuing even under the 3-child policy. So especially in Xinjiang, where the Uyghurs are, we're very concerned that it remains a policy up there.
Well, and that's a good transition point to the Uyghurs in that area. But so has your work actually had the impact inside of China that you had hoped it would have, or is it more helping us in the United States and the people that run our government to push back on China at all?
See, we're very unique, Rob, because we do two things. We do advocacy, and that's all the things I just told you about.
Mm-hmm.
Going and speaking in front of these government, and also on television, and just wonderful people like you. But we also we're the only organization in the world that has boots on the ground inside of China that is actively saving baby girls from sex-selective abortion, abandonment, and also just grinding poverty, and also abandoned widows, who are people that I call the the unknown, or the secret, or the silent victims of the one-child policy. And so we have a network of field workers who are extremely brave people who will be alerted to a woman who's being pressured to abort or abandon her baby girl, or whose girl is in danger because of just the catastrophic poverty that family is enduring, and will go and offer encouragement, saying girls are as good as boys, which is a radical message in the Chinese countryside, and then offering them $25 a month to help them keep and feed their baby girls. And we have saved hundreds of girls this way.
That's amazing, and that's a gift from God that there are people that have that level of courage, because that's tough to do in a communist country. That is really extremely difficult.
It's truly a gift from God, and our field workers are committed Christians, and they would love to tell people about Jesus. So a lot of the mothers of these baby girls, and also the abandoned widows, who will say things like, my own family abandoned me, my own government abandoned me, and yet these Christians or people of faith from across the sea are helping me. They're the ones who are helping me, and a lot of them are becoming Christians. And last time, my head field worker said that 10 of them had been baptized. So that's kind of amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing. That's fantastic news. But you mentioned the Uyghurs, and as I've mentioned before, we work together on the Committee on Present Danger China, and I work for you on the Stop Vax Passports Task Force. And the Uyghur Project are centered around the Olympic Games that just ended not too long ago. I think was very successful from what I can tell, but I'm a layman when it comes to that. But I know you were heavily involved, Reggie. I think you even went and testified maybe somewhere about this, but it ended up being called the Genocide Games. What were the overall results of our project to not allow China to be able to publicize those games and get the street cred, so to speak, in the international community?
Right. So you're right, Rob. I testified at the United States Congress last May 2021, in a hearing. I believe it was called the Olympics and Genocide in China. And at that time, May 2021, I was strongly advocating that the Olympics would be moved or boycotted entirely. And at that time, they could have been moved. I mean, the Tokyo Games were delayed for a year. I don't see any reason that the Beijing Games couldn't have been delayed for a year because of genocide and moved to a country that is not committing active genocide. So unfortunately, Nancy Pelosi opposed my message and the message of others, saying we should just do a diplomatic boycott, which would mean that the games would go forward and the athletes would be there, and China would get to have their propaganda party, and all that would happen is that the top officials would not attend, and that's what ended up happening. However, what our task force did is we shifted. What we saw was inevitable for that the games are going forward in Beijing, and that the sponsors, were continuing to sponsor them, because we also were pressuring the sponsors to not sponsor the Olympics. What we did is we shifted our focus on online and really pushed the hashtag Genocide Games, and also I will not watch. So tweets that saying hashtag I will not watch, the hashtag Genocide Games. We weren't the only ones who were doing this, but I believe that we were the ones that came up with the Genocide Game hashtag. And what happened is that people didn't watch. I mean, really, this was the least watched Olympics in the Olympic history. And my favorite headline was one that said, NBC's Olympics ratings just ski jumped straight into the toilet. So, and I just said, yes, because
Yeah.
what that does is it causes these sponsors to lose money, right?
Yeah.
NBC was and other sponsors were counting on there being a normal amount of enthusiasm around the games, and people would watch them, and so then they would be able to get advertising money from the sponsors and generate cash. And I think that they lost a lot of money. I don't know how much, but I believe that they lost a lot of money, and hopefully they will take an active stand at the International Olympics Committee that the games will not be, hosted again by a country that's one of the worst and possibly the worst human rights violator in the world, because
Yeah.
it's bad for business. I mean, they didn't do that on moral grounds, but at least they will do it on financial grounds, hopefully.
Well, one of the things that's always made me curious about the world's, the liberal democracy world's relationship with communist China is they don't seem to want to hold those people accountable like we used to hold the Soviet Union accountable. Even today, we're holding Russia accountable, and it's not even the Soviet Union anymore. But people tend to turn the other way. What's your perspective on that? And it sounds like we may have made some inroads there with this, especially economically, with the sponsors.
My perspective is that, when we were in the Cold War with Russia, Ronald Reagan called them the evil empire. We had no financial dependence on them, no relationship with them. And now with China, we're deeply in bed with them. The United States is, and much of the world is. It's really stupid. I mean, it is. It is. I'm sorry, but that's really, I guess I could call it imbecilic or some moronic. I mean, it's just stupid to be depending on people who consider us to be their enemy, okay, for our pharmaceuticals. So many of our pharmaceuticals are made in China. Some of our military components are made in China. We are so dependent on them in so many ways, to say nothing of the way that our big financial institutions are invested in China, so that we have every financial reason to want China to succeed and be a booming economy. And then with respect to other countries in the world, some of the more developing nations are dependent on China through something that's called the Belt and Road Initiative, where the Chinese Communist Party will lend a very large amount of money to a developing nation and say, well, we will lend you this money for you to build your port, or to build your railroad, or to build your airport. But then if you look at the fine print, if the country does not pay them back, then China exerts its right under contract to take the infrastructure.
Wow.
And that's happened, where they will lend a developing nation money for critical infrastructure. The developing nation predictably is not able to pay it back. And then China just seizes the infrastructure, giving themselves critical infrastructure all over the world. So it's really hard to stand up to China when you owe them however many billions of dollars if you're a developing nation, or you're in bed the way that we are with them. But it has to be done. It has to be done. So I was very disappointed in much of the world, almost all the world, that they didn't even do a diplomatic boycott, okay? Yeah. So the United States and a number of other countries at least did a diplomatic boycott. It was not enough, but it was at least a public statement that we know that they're committing genocide, and we object to it strenuously enough to publicly say our diplomats are not coming. Most of the world did not even do that. Yeah. And what that says to the Chinese Communist Party, the message that it sends is, you can do whatever you want. You can rape people, you can torture people, you can murder people, you can separate kids from their families, you can forcibly harvest organs from prisoners of conscience. Can forcibly abort 400 million women. You can persecute people on the basis of religion. You can run the biggest surveillance state in the world. You can have, however many hundreds of thousands or millions of internet police, and we don't care. We're not even going to do a diplomatic boycott. We're just going to send our athletes and pretend it didn't happen. So my concern is that it's going to embolden them in the way that the 1936 Olympics emboldened the Third Reich, in launching the Second World War, that it's going to embolden China to do more of their hegemony around the world.
Oh, I think you're right. The Chinese have gotten away with so much for so long. It's because really the United States and the West, mainly the United States, took a different approach to this communist government, and we built their economy for them. We've helped them become an economic hegemon that we didn't do with the Soviet Union, because quite frankly, we spent the Soviet Union into non-existence in the 1990s under the Reagan administration. That's how we brought them down without going to all-out war with them. So yeah, we've taken a totally different approach, and it seems like damn the communists. We just want to make money. Leave them alone. Let them do. And you rattled off all of the inhumane and human rights violations that they do and get away with every single day of their existence. And it's tragic, and it's time that the United States and the West start standing up. And I think we have a good opportunity to do that, and we better do that with this Russia conflict. We've sanctioned Russia, but we haven't sanctioned China, and they're backing them. They're going to provide an economic funnel back and forth to Russia to get around the sanctions. We know that. Well, we ought to be sanctioning China at the same time, in my opinion, and really getting a hold of isolating them from a cyber, economic, and a military perspective. And that leads me, you kind of briefly mentioned it, the social credit system, the surveillance state that the Chinese have developed with the help of companies like Facebook, I might add. And why is that such a danger, and how is it linked to the vaccine passport issue that we've talked about before?
Okay, so thank you for asking. There are so many people who have been up in arms about the vaccine mandates. They are against forcing people who don't want to be vaccinated to be vaccinated. They're opposing the forcible use of masks, including for people who've been vaccinated, people who are COVID recovered and who have natural immunity. I mean, I support those efforts. I oppose vaccine mandates. I oppose mask mandates, but almost nobody's talking about the vaccine passport. And I believe the vaccine passport is the end game of the mandates. So the vaccine passport is the digital, it's a digital app on your phone. And it could even be a QR code that is being constructed nationally and internationally. And they say, okay, this is an easy way for you to just show whether you're vaccinated or not, show what your health status is. But the fact is that according to tech experts, and when I say tech experts, I mean Naomi Wolf was the first one who was crying out about this, but then also Jay Valentine, who is he is an extremely sophisticated person technologically. So he developed the fraud detection software for eBay. He developed the US no-fly list. So he really knows what he's talking about when he says that the digital platform on a person's phone, the vaccine passport, can incorporate the same functionality as China's social credit system within a matter of minutes. We're not talking hours, days, weeks, or months. We're talking about minutes.
Wow.
And I want to talk about the China social credit system, what it's like.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in China, they have the biggest surveillance state in the world, and everything is surveilled. So they have facial recognition, they have real-time geolocation, so they know exactly where you are, and all of these are centralized. They're in a centralized database, which is what the vaccine passport would provide. So they're also tracking all your social media posts, your internet search history. So if you search for something that they don't like Tiananmen Square, you will go down. You could even get internet police at your door. Your internet spending history, so whatever you buy, your entire medical history, your criminal history, where you live, where you work, In China, they even track like what video games that you're playing online. And so what they do is they track everything. They have something called Xi Jinping Thought, which is a brainwashing program. And if you watch that program, your score will go up. And you can't just watch it passively. They ask you questions at the end to make sure you understood and you really listened. And some employers will force you to watch that Xi Jinping Thought, because if you come in the next day and you didn't do it the night before, your employer will say, "What's up with you? You didn't watch this Xi Jinping Thought last night." And in China, also, people are encouraged to snitch on each other. And this started under the one-child policy, where if a woman was illegally pregnant, she could be ratted on by her. Well, usually it's not her family, but her friends, her neighbors, her co-workers. They had people sitting in the villages squares and just watching women, to stop women who looked like they were pregnant and see if they had a birth permit. Okay, so all of this stuff. Okay, so if you have a high score, then you can travel, you can borrow money and buy a home, your kids can go to a good school, you can have a good job. If your score lowers, and the social credit score, I would say, could be better called a social conformity score. In other words, if you conform to the Chinese Communist ideal, you can live what looks like a normal life, but you're a slave. As soon as you stop conforming, as soon as you do that internet search that they don't like, like Uyghur genocide. Oh my gosh, if somebody in China searched for that, I mean, all hell would break loose in their lives. Then it goes down, and then and they will do things like you will lose your job, you will lose the ability to travel, you will lose the ability to borrow money, so you can't buy a home. And if you continue, then the next level down is they will shut you off from your bank account and your credit cards, like we just saw in Canada. Okay. Yes. Yeah. And China is more and more a cashless society. So if you have no access to your credit cards or your bank accounts, what are you going to do? I mean, you're going to become a homeless person, and then anybody who helps you is going to get persecuted. So no one's going to help you. And then if you really anger them, like if you're a true dissident, then you could end up being disappeared very quickly because of the real-time geolocation. They know where everyone is at all times, and they know your entire social network. They know who you hang out with. Your network could get, all your friends could end up getting detained as well if you're a bad enough person. So So this can come. So all of this can come to the United States, and see, this is the thing. So, and this is my opinion. Okay, I believe that
that's what we're here for.
Okay. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. I'm going to preface all of this with, I hope I'm wrong. Okay, what I'm about to say. It appears to me, I hope I'm wrong, that the reason that they are loosening up on the mandates of vaccination and mask is that those in power know that these are incredibly unpopular, and it's an election year. All right.
Yeah. That's right.
God forbid. I hope it's not going to happen, but God forbid if another pandemic were to hit in September, October timeframe, and God forbid whether that would affect whether we can even have an election in November, or the mail-in ballots that all voting will have to be mail-in, which, as we have seen, could give rise to, questionable ballots. Let's just put it that way. I hope I'm wrong. I hope this is not a plan like that. All right. So everybody, so they're easing up on these mandates. And so everybody's going, oh, I'm so glad I don't have to get vaccinated. I don't have to wear a mask anymore. And so people are breathing a sigh of relief because we've been under so much pressure for so long. And so in this time when people are kind of relaxing, we're heading into spring, the vaccine passports are being quietly deployed.
Exactly.
Okay? And it's the passports that are the end game, in my opinion, of the mandates. The reason that they are mandating that everybody get a vaccine and trying to foment all of this fear and tamping down on number one, not publicizing vaccine injuries, not publicizing early treatments. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so that keep everybody in a state of fear, like, oh my gosh, this thing is terrible. But
Yeah.
at least we have the vaccine. The vaccine is the answer. And if you don't have the vaccine, then you're a pariah. And we need to have a vaccine passport to verify whether everybody is vaccinated. So that's the end game, is to get everybody into a state of mind that they will accept and actually will want a vaccine passport. And so they're deploying these now when people are in a relaxed state concerning the mandates.
And the software can be, as you mentioned, it can be transitioned to a social credit system within a few minutes because it's the same software. And when I see things like judges making January 6th defendants that were nonviolent stay in jail because they still they have wrongthink about the 2020 election, and I see those kinds of things, and you see that the pressure campaigns that happened during the height of the pandemic, trying to isolate and demonize non-vaccinated people. Even though there were very good reasons for a lot of people not to be vaccinated, very good ones, as a matter of fact. And you see all of that, and then you witness what happened with the banks in Canada against the truckers who were totally peaceful. The only violence that occurred in Canada was from the police. The only violence that scares the hell out of me. Doesn't it scare you?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So this is a precursor to what could happen in the United States. So the truckers were opposing the mandates. Mm-hmm. All right. People lose sight of what was the beginning. And these truckers had to have they had to be vaccinated, or they had to prove this to go across international boundaries, or it had to do with vaccine mandates. And vaccine passports, and that was the beginning of the whole thing. And they descended on Ottawa, and then the Canadian government came down on them in a lot of ways financially. So they froze bank accounts of the truckers, and also of people who had donated to the truckers. So I read that there was a woman who was a minimum wage worker, and she donated $50 to the truckers. That's a lot of money for a minimum wage worker. I'm sure that she was living paycheck to paycheck. She made the sacrifice to donate $50 to the truckers, and then she got her bank accounts frozen and her credit cards frozen. So she had no access to money. They don't have to shoot you. I mean, they can just freeze your bank account and freeze your credit cards, and you are paralyzed. You're totally paralyzed. You're totally unable to function in the society.
Yeah, I mean, it's all you have to do is Google Chinese social credit system, folks, and you can see what we're talking about. And it's not like these are conspiracy theories. And Reggie, I hope you're wrong too, about the final outcome or the plan. But there's so much truth out there and facts out there that sure show that we're going down this road, whether it's intentional or it's because we're not paying attention to what our elected officials are doing, and we're just breathing that sigh of relief. And while we're doing that, they're just behind the scenes making it continue to happen. We've got to do something. We've got to act from the local to the federal level and get this unwound, don't we?
Yeah. So, I mean, and this is what I want to say to alert people. And you said this in the beginning, but I'm going to reiterate it. Okay. Mm-hmm. They're not going to call it a vaccine passport because we and others have made that term radioactive. So some places actually will call it a vaccine passport, but a lot of places will not call it a vaccine passport. They'll call it a smart health card, or they'll call it some kind of a digital certification code. I mean, they don't call it a vaccine passport, and they're passing it very quietly as, this is a good way just to keep track of things. Mm-hmm. And people need to wake up and oppose these things. I have, so in Maryland, we had a hearing this week on vaccine passports, and I created like a 10-point list of talking points that anybody can use. It's going to go up on the stopvaxpassports.org website. That these points can be used to fight vaccine passports by whatever name in whatever state, and everybody needs to take responsibility for their state. And stop these things in their state. And the other thing is, Robin, this is not just a United States thing, okay? There's a movement towards it in Europe. And of course, China is pushing for these passports, these vaccine passports, to be standardized internationally, so that if all this information of ours is on these passports, it's going to be available to the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, we do not want all of our personal information to be accessed potentially by the Chinese Communist Party. They want to turn the world into a surveillance state. They would love that.
So are you talking about a global social credit system?
I'm talking, well, yes.
A worldwide?
Ultimately. But what I'm talking about now is these vaccine passports going global and being standardized globally, so that any, for travel, and they always make it convenient. It's like, oh, this way it'll make it easier for you to travel to China, or it'll make it easier for you to travel all over the world. It's always a trade-off between convenience and privacy and freedom.
Yeah. Don't trade your safety for security, because you'll lose both. That's what I think Benjamin Franklin, I'm paraphrasing something he said hundreds of years ago, and he's turned out he's right. He's right. Is there anything besides the vaccine passport, the digitized version of that, that we need to stand up against to unwind this effort? Here in America, a lot of it reminds me of the surveillance state issues, remind me of the Patriot Act, which I've tried to get repealed, and I know some congressmen, a few, have tried to get it repealed, but they keep renewing it, and they make it stronger every time we renew it. Is that part of this, or should we address that part of this when we're talking to our federal congressmen and congresswomen?
Well, this is something that I have just been made aware of in the last, couple months, is the way that after 9/11, that the Patriot Act, when it was enacted, it was, it gave very broad emergency powers to, I guess, the president in the case of a real emergency like 9/11, and the various states also have emergency powers.
Yeah.
But the problem is that the emergency is not really well defined, okay? And so then the states have been invoking these emergency powers. Some of the states have been invoking these emergency powers and taking away really important constitutional freedoms under this the EUA, Emergency Use Act, and so we need to do is we need to get those what constitutes an emergency to be defined, and to make people aware of the tremendous powers that the states have, under these emergency powers. So President Biden just recently, February 16th, I think I'm seeing here, decided to continue the state of emergency for COVID beyond when it was going to be, beyond March 1st, okay, which is when it was going to expire. And so, he just did that on his own. And so what that does is it enables him to continue to have, these powers and take people's freedoms away.
Yeah, and I think he extended it for 2 years. Now think about this, folks. The State of the Union was just a few days ago, this past week, and none of them wore masks in order to get there, because this thing is over. It's over, and more importantly, the people are saying we're done with this. But we've got to unwind these powers. So we've got to address our state legislatures and our federal legislatures to get these powers unwound. And and do a reassessment of what really ought to be a power under emergency conditions, right?
So I'm holding this article from the Liberty Daily, and it said the title here is "Depopulationist Bill Gates hints at the next evil plan will have another pandemic, and it will be a different pathogen next time." So again, I hope I'm wrong, but it seems to me that we had the coronavirus. And under the coronavirus, we had this pandemic. We had all these emergency, use powers that were given to the various governors, and we lost our freedoms. And now they are lightening up on this. But God forbid that and so they're lightening up on the mandates. But then God forbid that there's another pandemic with a different pathogen.
Yeah.
And then right, of course, in the September-October timeframe. And meanwhile, these vaccine passports have been put in place, and then they clamp down on us because they've got the passports while we were just, breathing a sigh of relief.
Yeah. I hope you're wrong, but that certainly looks like it. That's why we've got to act, And I'm going to read the 5 GOP states off again. Arizona, Mississippi, South Carolina, Oklahoma, and Utah are quietly trying to pass legislation to put these in place right now. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to act, and we have to act decisively and stop this. Reggie, thank you very much for joining us today. What are the future plans for your organization? You got any projects on the horizon that my audience can sign up to help you with?
Well, if people want to help, we just are international advocates exposing and opposing coercive population control in China, and also the encroachment of Chinese-style totalitarianism in the United States. So that's why we were the co-founders of the Stop Vaccine Passports, and people can even directly support these women and babies in China. And, but you go on my website, Women's Rights Without Frontiers, and at the upper right-hand side, it says Save a Girl, and it says Save a Widow. You can click on those to learn more about those campaigns. It's the only way for you to directly get funds into the hands of a mother who's struggling to keep her daughter or to feed her daughter, or of a widow that is struggling just to live in rural China.
Well, thank you very much. We certainly appreciate your time. I know as I said at the beginning of this, you're very busy because you're involved in a lot of these things, trying to help people get and keep their freedom. And it's a pleasure to have had you on. I really appreciate it, folks. You can follow Reggie on Twitter. I've got her Twitter account up on the screen here, and we look forward to talking to you again next time when I'm sure there'll be another task force out there, because you're a hard worker, and it's for all the right reasons, Reggie. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was an honor.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was Reggie Littlejohn, the president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers, a human rights activist and an activist leading the Stop Vaccine Passports Task Force. You can find more about that at stopvaxpassports.org. I am a member of that, in all transparency, and we are working very hard to stop that, because that does lead to a global digital social credit system that can do things like what happened to the trucker protesters in Canada at the drop of a hat. We have to stand up and fight against it. There's a lot going on, folks. Don't believe what the politicians are doing. Find your own information. It's out there. The truth is out there. Don't believe the propaganda that's happening. And certainly, we're not going to let these politicians off the hook for this pandemic and these terrible, atrocious attacks on our liberty. Remember them at the polls every single time, at the local, state, and federal level. Don't let us forget that. We need to be smart voters and not forget, because every one of them should be thrown out of office. Until next week, I'm Rob Maness. We'll see you then.